Hey, welcome back to Hidden Badges Stories. I'm glad you're here. If you're new, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories about the people who show up quietly and change everything. And wherever you're listening right now, driving, cooking, folding laundry, drop a comment and tell me. I love knowing where my listeners are. Now settle in. This one is going to stay with you. The chief of emergency medicine at Hargrove General did not believe in quiet people. Dr. Phillip Crane had been running the ER for 11 years, and in those 11 years he had developed a theory. The ones who said the least were the ones who knew the least. Confidence, in his experience, was volume. It was certainty. It was the ability to walk into a trauma bay and announce what was going to happen before anyone had time to argue. So when the day charge nurse handed him the new staffing rotation and he saw the name Wren Callahan listed as the sole overnight nurse for Trauma Bay 2, he laughed, not a chuckle, a full, open-mouthed laugh. Callahan, he said, to no one in particular. Dr. Ossie was standing nearby, reviewing a chart. The two residents, Fitch and Beaumont, were near the supply cabinet, pretending not to listen. Does anyone know if Callahan has said more than 4 words in a single shift? Nobody answered. Because I've worked alongside her for 8 months and I'm not sure she can. Dr. Ossie looked up briefly, then looked back down. Wren Callahan herself was 6 feet away. She was standing at the medication cart with her back to him, documenting a vitals update on a patient in Bay 4. She wore the standard issue scrubs, the bright teal ones that the nursing staff had started ordering in bulk from some supplier in Ohio, and her dark hair was pulled back in the same bun she wore every single shift. She did not turn around. She did not acknowledge the laugh. She finished her documentation, capped her pen, and moved to the next bay. Crane watched her go. That woman, he said quietly, is going to have a very hard night. He had no idea how right he was. He just had the wrong person in mind. Wren Callahan had come to Hargrove General 2 years earlier through what the HR paperwork described as a career transition. She had a nursing degree from a state university in Virginia, several years of clinical experience at a trauma center in El Paso, and a gap in her resume between ages 22 and 29 that she had listed simply as federal service. Nobody had followed up on that. Nobody at Hargrove General had asked what federal service meant when your references were redacted and your last supervisor's contact information was a P.O. box in Northern Virginia. Nobody had pulled the thread on the commendation letters that didn't name the theater of operations. Nobody had noticed that when the hospital ran its annual mass casualty drill and asked staff to rate their comfort level on a scale of 1 to 5, Wren had written not applicable in the margin and handed the form back. She had her license. She had her certifications. More of them, actually, than the form had space for. She had showed up on time every day for 2 years and done her job without complaint and gone home to the apartment near the river where she lived alone with a dog named after a river she had once crossed in the dark. Her colleagues liked her well enough. They described her, if asked, as steady. As good in a crisis. As someone you want in the room. Dr. Crane described her as furniture. Useful, he had said once to a colleague at a conference, in the way that a good chair is useful, present, reliable, but not something you'd ask to make a decision. Wren had not been at that conference, but in a hospital, things get back. They always get back. The shift started at 7 p.m. on a Thursday in late October. Outside, a storm had been building since mid-afternoon, the kind of October storm that the Weather Service had been tracking for 2 days, and the city had mostly ignored. The kind that turned surface streets into streams by 9 and knocked out traffic signals by 10 and sent the ambulance dispatch board into a slow, steady escalation that the overnight staff recognized in their bones even before the radio confirmed it. Wren had checked the weather app at 6:15. She had looked at the map, at the colored bands moving northeast, at the timestamp showing landfall at roughly 9 p.m. She had eaten her dinner, a container of rice and black beans she had made Sunday and portioned into 4 containers, and she had driven to work in the rain that was just starting. When she walked into the ER at 6:50, Dr. Crane was still there, technically ending his day shift but lingering, the way he sometimes lingered when he wanted people to see him lingering. "Callahan," he said when she signed in, "you're solo in Trauma 2 tonight." "I know," she said. "I saw the rotation. Pryor called out sick. We're short a nurse on that side." "I know," she said again. He tilted his head. There was something in his expression she recognized. The look men with authority sometimes get when they have decided to press on something to see if it gives. "You're not going to ask for a replacement? Is there one available?" A beat. "No. Then there's nothing to ask for." He stared at her for a moment. She held the stare without effort, the way she held most things. Not with aggression, not with submission, just with a kind of absolute steadiness that some people found reassuring and others, she had noticed, found unnerving. Crane, she could tell, found it the latter. "The storm's going to bring in volume," he said. "It'll be a busy night." "Yes," she said. "It will." She picked up her badge, clipped it to her scrubs, and walked toward Trauma Bay 2. Behind her, she heard him say something to one of the residents. She didn't catch all of it. She caught the words alone and handle, and the laugh that followed, low and certain. the laugh of a man who had already decided how the night was going to go. Wren Callahan had heard that laugh before. In different rooms. From different people. In some of those rooms, lives had been on the line when the laughing stopped. She tied on her isolation gown, snapped on her gloves, and checked the supply inventory in Bay 2. Everything was where it should be. She made 2 small adjustments, moved the trauma shears to the right side, repositioned the laryngoscope handle where she could reach it in the dark if she had to. And then she sat down in the chair beside the monitoring station and waited. The radio crackled at 9:04 p.m. Multi-vehicle accident on Route 9 and Birchwood Crossing. 5 confirmed injured, 1 critical. ETA 11 minutes. Wren was already moving before the second transmission came through. She pulled the crash cart to the center of the bay, confirmed the defibrillator charge, checked the medication drawers in the sequence she had memorized not from nursing school, but from a different kind of training in a different kind of room, and flagged the charge desk. "I need a second pair of hands when they come in," she said. The charge nurse, a man named Gil, who had been doing this for 23 years and had a particular respect for people who did not panic, looked at the board and said, "I can give you Eddie for about 20 minutes before the next shift change." "That'll do," Wren said. Eddie was a tech, young, maybe 24, nervous around blood but good with his hands and better with patience. He appeared at the bay door 2 minutes later with wide eyes, and Wren handed him a list. "Get me 2 large bore AVs set up, 2 units O-neg from the blood bank and the rapid infuser." "Do you know where the rapid infuser is? Supply room B?" "Supply room B. Second shelf, left side. Go." He went. The first ambulance arrived at 9:17. The patient was a man in his 50s, stocky, wearing a construction jacket that had been cut away by the paramedics, a laceration across his scalp bleeding in that particular way. Scalp lacerations bleed, which is dramatically but usually not life-threateningly. His BP was stable, his airway was clear. He was conscious and furious about it, the way injured men sometimes are, yelling about his truck and asking repeatedly where his dog was. Wren assessed him in 45 seconds, ordered the CT, flagged him as priority 2, and moved to the door. The second ambulance was already backing in. This patient was different. Female, early 30s, passenger seat impact, airbag deployment, possible internal abdominal trauma. Pressure low, skin mottled and cool. The paramedic who handed off was calm, but his eyes said, "Hurry." Wren said, "Or is notified." "In transit," the paramedic said. "Go," she said to Eddie, and they moved. The next 20 minutes were the kind of 20 minutes that either break a person or reveal them. The woman, whose name, Wren would learn later, was Darlene, needed a fast assessment, a line, a push of fluid, and a surgical consult in a window that did not have room for hesitation. Wren moved through the steps with the specific economy of someone who has done this not in a teaching hospital under supervision, but in circumstances that did not have ceilings or reliable lighting, or a backup team on standby. She had done this in a forward operating base, in a country she was not permitted to name in job applications. She had done it with less. Dr. Crane appeared at the bay entrance at 9:38. He took in the scene. Darlene stabilized, vitals improving, Eddie holding a pressure bag and looking like he had aged 3 years and 20 minutes. And he said nothing. Wren glanced up, made eye contact, looked back down. "Surgical's on the way," she said, to no one in particular, meaning to the air and to whoever was listening, and specifically not to Crane. "She needs ore within the hour." Crane said, "I'll take it from here." Wren straightened. "She's mine until surgical takes the handoff." A pause. Something shifted in the room. Eddie stared at the wall. Crane said, "I'm the attending." "You are," Wren said. "And I'm the nurse who's been with her for 22 minutes. If you want to review my assessment, I'll walk you through it. But I'm not stepping back until Dr. Reyes takes her upstairs." Another pause. Longer. Crane left the bay. The third patient arrived at 9:51. This one, Wren would not forget. He was small, 7 years old according to the paramedic, although he looked younger, the way frightened children sometimes do, curled into themselves like they're trying to take up less space in a world that has suddenly become very large and very loud. His name was Owen. He had been in the back seat, properly restrained, but the force of the collision had done something to his right arm. The angle was wrong, the kind of wrong that a child shouldn't have to understand, and there was a bruise forming under his ribs on the left side that Wren did not like. He was not crying. He had cried himself out in the ambulance, the paramedic said quietly. Now he was just looking at the ceiling with the specific blankness of a child who has decided that if he is very still, nothing else bad will happen. Wren pulled a chair up to the side of the gurney. "Hey, Owen." He looked at her. "My name is Wren. I'm your nurse tonight." He said nothing. "That's okay," she said. "You don't have to talk. I'm going to check some things and I'll tell you what I'm doing before I do it. Is that okay?" A pause. Then a small nod. She worked slowly, deliberately. She narrated every step the way she had learned to narrate in a different context. A voice used not for children but for adults in shock in the dark. The voice that says, "I'm here. I know what I'm doing. You are not alone." She checked his pupils. She palpated his abdomen gently, watching his face for the involuntary flinch that would tell her more than any verbal response. She looked at the arm and determined it was a fracture, radius, probably, clean. And she splinted it with the care of someone who understood that the way you handle a child's arm in the first hour determines whether they trust medical people for the rest of their lives. Your mom's on her way, Wren said. He said, she was in the car. Wren kept her expression steady. She's being taken care of by other people, really good people, and she's going to come find you as soon as she can. The bruise under his ribs bothered her. She ordered imaging. She flagged it as a priority. She stayed with him until the radiology tech came. Before they took him away, he said, do you have a dog? She blinked. I do. What's his name? Her name, Wren said. Her name is Kessler. He thought about that. That's a weird name. Yeah, she said. It is. Something in his face shifted. Not a smile, exactly. But the blankness cracked, just slightly, and underneath it was a 7-year-old boy who was scared and tired and who had just had a conversation that was not about his injuries. That mattered. That mattered more than Wren could explain in a chart note. She watched him go down the hall. Then she turned around and walked back toward the bay. The 4th patient came in at 10:12, the 5th at 10:29, the 6th at 10:47. The storm had done what October storms do. It had pulled vehicles into intersections at bad angles. It had taken a curve on Route 9 and made it into a collision point. It had turned one bad decision on a wet road into a cascade that filled 3 ambulances and sent 2 more directly to Mercy Cross across the river. Hargrove got the Route 9 cases. All of them. Wren did not stop moving for 90 minutes. The 4th patient, a teenager named Marcus who had been driving his mother's car without a license and knew it, and was terrified of 2 things simultaneously, his injuries and his mother, needed a laceration closed and a conversation, in that order. Wren stitched him in 15 minutes, clean and precise, the kind of sutures that heal without a scar if you take care of them. She told him that. Take care of them, she said, cutting the last knot, and nobody'll be able to tell. He looked at her like she was the only person in the building who was not going to yell at him. The 5th patient was an elderly woman named Hattie, who had been a passenger in the 3rd vehicle, and who had a compression fracture in her lower thoracic spine that was going to require ortho, and a longer conversation than Wren had time for right now. So she stabilized her, managed her pain, and made sure the woman's hand was held by someone while they waited for the specialist. She assigned that task to Eddie, who looked grateful for something he could do without a medical degree. Hold her hand, Wren said. Don't let go until the ortho resident gets here. Okay, he said. And if she asks you your name, tell her. My name? She's scared. She needs to know there's a person next to her, not just a set of hands. He nodded and sat down and took the old woman's hand and said, My name's Eddie. The 6th patient was a man named Doyle, late 40s, heavyset, hypertensive before the accident and now dangerously so after it, a head laceration that was not the primary concern and a blood pressure reading that was. He had the look of a man who had been told many times to take better care of himself and had not done it, and who now found himself in a fluorescent room with a nurse he had already decided too young and too female to be in charge of anything important. Where's the doctor? He said when Wren started her assessment. Being summoned, Wren said. In the meantime, I need to check your. I want a doctor. Mr. Doyle. She said it the way she said most things, even unhurried, without apology. Your blood pressure is in a range that requires immediate attention. I can start that attention right now, or we can wait for the physician, in which case we are looking at possibly 12 to 15 minutes during which your pressure continues to climb. I'd prefer not to do that. Would you prefer not to do that? He stared at her. That's what I thought, she said, and snapped a new glove on her left hand. She had him stabilized before the hospitalist arrived. When Dr. Ayala walked in and reviewed the chart, she looked at Wren with the particular expression of a physician who has learned, over years, to recognize nursing assessment quality, and she said, Good catch on the secondary. He's been running high for a while, Wren said. You can see it in his nail beds. Ayala looked at the nail beds, said nothing but made a note. At 11:22 p.m., Trauma Bay 2 went quiet for the first time in 2 hours. Wren stood at the documentation station and entered her last set of notes. Her scrubs had a streak of something on the left forearm. She didn't look down to identify it, and her bun had come partially loose around the right side, and she hadn't had time to fix it and still had not. The documentation took 12 minutes. It was accurate and thorough and written in the specific, unembellished language of someone who understands that what you write in a chart becomes the record that another clinician will rely on at 3 a.m. when you're not there. She submitted the last note and rolled her shoulders once. Eddie appeared at the bay entrance. He looked like a person who had run a 5K and discovered, during the running, that he was capable of it. A little stunned by himself, Hattie settled, he said. Ortho's with her. Good, Owen's mom is out of surgery. He hesitated. She's stable. Wren exhaled once, slowly. Okay, he's been asking about the dog. Wren almost smiled. Tell him Kessler is fine. Eddie lingered. How did you know all of that, he said. The stuff with Mr. Doyle, the secondary bleed you called before the CT came back on the 3rd patient, where did you? Learn it, she said. Yeah, she was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, she was never evasive, just deciding, in the way she decided most things, what was necessary to say and what was not. I've worked in places where you learn fast, she said, or you don't get the chance to learn slow. He didn't push. Somehow he understood not to push. She picked up her clipboard and moved toward the exit to check on Darlene. Dr. Crane was at the charge desk when she walked past. He had been there for some time, she understood. Not treating patients, the overnight attending had taken the bay, but present. Watching. The way a man watches something he predicted would fail and is now recalculating. He said, Callahan, she stopped. 6 patients, he said. Yes, you handled 6 patients. With Eddie, he was good tonight. Crane's jaw shifted slightly. He looked at the board, the names, the statuses, the sequence of events that had played out in that bay over the last 2 hours. Then he looked at her. What's your background, he said. It was the first time in 8 months he had asked her anything about herself. Trauma nursing, she said. And some other things. What other things? She looked at him for a moment. Not with satisfaction, she had never needed him to ask. Not with anger, because she had set that down a long time ago in a room on a different continent. Just with the same steadiness she had walked in with 7 hours earlier. The kind that doesn't fit on a form, she said. She picked up the chart she needed and walked down the hall. It was Gil who found out. He had worked nights at Hargrove for 23 years. And he had a method for new staff that involved looking at what they did when they didn't know anyone was watching. He had been watching Wren Callahan for 2 years, the way he watched everyone, and what he saw was someone who pre-positioned equipment before she needed it, who spoke to frightened patients in a register that was specifically calibrated to slow a panic response, who assessed a wound in the sequence that suggested not nursing school but field medicine, and who had once, during a mass casualty drill that the hospital ran for FEMA certification, quietly rerouted 3 simulated patients to a secondary triage point that no one had thought to open, and said, when asked later, standard contingency. He had run that phrase, standard contingency, past a friend of his who had done 20 years in the army, and his friend had said, that's not nursing language. That's doctrine. So Gil had done what Gil did, which was wait. He waited until a night in November when the ear was quiet and he and Wren were both near the end of a long shift, and he said, Can I ask you something? She said yes. What was your call sign? She looked at him for a long moment. Gil held the look. Ghost, she said. He nodded slowly. Combat medic? Close enough. He was quiet. Then he said, You know, the best thing about this job is that the people who are actually good at it don't usually come from where everyone expects. Wren looked at the board, at the names cycling through, admitted, discharged, treated, and released. Owen upstairs with his mother and whatever story they were going to have to tell about that night for the rest of their lives. Hattie in ortho with the particular comfort of having had her hand held at the right moment by someone who told her his name. Darlene 2 floors up and stable, alive in the specific way that meant she would go home to something. No, Wren said. They don't. She finished her notes. She turned in her badge. She put on her coat and walked out into the November morning, where the storm had passed and the road outside was wet and gleaming, and the sky was the pale gray of a shift just ending. She drove home. She opened the door. Kessler. A shepherd mix, older now, slower in the mornings, raised her head from the couch and looked at Wren the way dogs look at people they have decided belong to them. Wren sat down next to her and put one hand on the dog's side and felt the breathing, steady and even. She sat there for a while. Not thinking about Crane. Not thinking about the laugh he had laughed 9 hours earlier, the one that had been aimed at her like a small, calculated wound. Not thinking about whether he would say anything tomorrow, or whether things would be different, or whether they wouldn't. She was thinking about Owen asking her the name of her dog. She was thinking about Kessler. She was thinking that sometimes the thing that cracks a frightened child open into something, almost like safety, is a weird name for a dog and a nurse who has the time, in the middle of the worst night of the child's life, to sit down in a chair and stay. That was the work. The rest was noise. She closed her eyes. Outside, the city was quiet in the way a city gets quiet just before it starts again. The particular held breath of early morning, when the shift that's ending and the shift that's beginning exist in the same moment, and everything that happened in the dark is still true, and everything that happens in the light is still possible. Wren Callahan had worked the night. The night had not worked her. Thanks for listening all the way to the end. It means everything. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who works the quiet shifts, the ones nobody sees. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. I'll see you in the next one.